You know, let's talk about the law. You're a lawyer, Senator. You've argued before the Supreme Court successfully. And from a legal standpoint, let's say I went down to the border and I brought a big truck with me and I picked up a bunch of illegal immigrants and I started transporting them across the country. Would I or would I not likely be arrested for human trafficking? And would it be illegal to do that for me if I did that?
For you, a citizen, you could easily be arrested, although, to be honest, Joe Biden's Justice Department wouldn't arrest you. But in an ordinary Justice Department,
I'm a conservative.
I
disagree. They'd arrest me. They'd arrest
that's true.
If I was a liberal, I'd get away with it.
True.
Yeah. But back to the law. The law is clear.
It is clear, and right now, the biggest trafficker on the face of the planet is Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
So I don't know what Hannity's endgame was here, but I'm not sure that having Ted Cruz admit that transporting migrants across state lines would be considered human trafficking right after Ron DeSantis took credit for doing exactly that is the smartest move here. Like, congrats, you guys. You just accused a couple of Republican governors of committing an illegal offense. This comes on the heels of Ron DeSantis taking credit for shipping 50 migrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard, which, to be clear, is an island. The officials who loaded these migrants onto the plane told them that they'd be going to Boston where they'd have jobs and housing. That was a lie, and they were shipped instead to a remote island with no jobs and no housing. Of course, it was never about being honest, it was never about having humanity, it was about saying or doing whatever they needed to do in order to achieve their actual goal, which was to come on Fox and do an interview like this one. Republicans won't do anything at all unless it has the potential to further their own personal political career. What makes this even more shameful is that this victory lap by Hannity and Cruz comes in the wake of the people of Massachusetts doing everything right. After 50 migrants were dropped on a remote island with zero warning, still the people of Martha's Vineyard banded together, cooked them food, took them in, threw together temporary accommodations, and treated them with humanity. And the whole country watched scenes like this.
Thank you.
From there, the governor of Massachusetts, who by the way is a Republican, arranged for them to be sent to another city within that state, Cape Cod, where there was adequate food, shelter, and essential services. Honestly, what else could you possibly ask for? To leave them on an island or put them somewhere where they can actually be taken care of? The people of Massachusetts did precisely what they should have. And yet, if you needed an indication of the extent to which reality does not matter to these people, these Republicans, here's Ted Cruz's take on what happened in Martha's Vineyard.
Now, with just 50, they've lost it. And what did they do within 24 hours? These leftist hypocrites load them on buses and deported them out of there.
Ah, yes, deportation, which famously occurs when a state keeps migrants within that state, only to place them where they can actually get the services they need to survive. Because I'm Ted Cruz and I know what words mean. Notice too how he said that the people of Martha's Vineyard lost it. Again, they gave them what shelter was available on the island. They gave them food. They treated them with dignity and compassion and respect. They arranged for transportation to a place where they have long-term prospects. And still Cruz looks at that and decides that he's going to frame it in such a way that the people of Martha's Vineyard had some kind of a meltdown. Very clearly, there is one person having a meltdown here, and it's no one from Martha's Vineyard. In effect, Ted Cruz wanted the meltdown to happen. He wanted mayhem. He wanted those Massachusetts liberals to react poorly to the migrants. He wanted them to banish them off their islands and complain about their existence and shudder at the thought of helping them. Why? Because that's what Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis and Sean Hannity do. And they're looking for a permission structure to continue doing so without feeling any shame. And so they figured that if they could scientifically engineer a situation where they could inconvenience some rich liberals in the most obvious way, like, say, by shipping migrants to a literal remote island where there was no way they could get the care that they needed, then they could get the validation that they were looking for. And of course, they didn't get it, not even close, and so now they're just gonna lie, pretend that what they wanted to happen actually did happen, and continue selling their make-believe narrative anyway. Because when the facts are too inconvenient, just lie. And in case there was any doubt about the extent to which they're proud of this accomplishment, here's Ted Cruz with more marching orders.
Let me say, Sean, I commend Greg Abbott for sending the immigrants to these blue cities. I commend Ron DeSantis for doing so, and they need to do more. Tomorrow, Martha's Vineyard needs 100. The next day, they need 200. The next day, they need 1,000. D.C. says it's a crisis to get 6,000. They need 10,000. They need 100,000.
If you can't see that Ted Cruz is driven solely by his desire to ruin lives, then you're not paying attention. These people like Ted Cruz, exist solely to punish those whose political views don't comport with their own. And so this guy shows up to work and collects $174,000 a year so that he can try to cause chaos. That is his only governing philosophy. That's what his party thinks that they're in government to do: to fearmonger, wreak havoc, and lie to the vulnerable if it means that they can score a cheap political win. These Republicans want you to think that all of politics has to be like that, but it doesn't, even though the GOP is trying their hardest to make that the case. Because while people like Ted Cruz are trying to ensure that the system burns down, Democrats have spent their time in charge by passing the American Rescue Plan, ensuring that all of Americans have access to vaccines and COVID tests for free. They've passed the infrastructure package, which will finally upgrade our crumbling infrastructure. That was a joke during the Trump era. It's a reality during this time. They've passed the first gun safety package in decades. They've passed the CHIPS Act, which funds the domestic semiconductor chip industry right here in the United States, and the PACT Act, which funds healthcare for sick veterans. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest climate investment in history, allows the government to finally negotiate lower drug prices, and finally makes the rich pay their fair share. They've forgiven student loan debt for 43 million American borrowers. They've overseen the strengthening of NATO and the death of the leader of Al-Qaeda. They've added 10 million jobs and brought the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. Politics doesn't have to be so ugly and heartless and evil. People like Ted Cruz have made the conscious decision to make it that way. So the next time these people parade themselves around as if they're the pro-life party, as if they're the party of family values, just remember that their final message to voters ahead of midterms was to use human beings as a political stunt in a desperate attempt to try to get us to stop talking about their extremist position on abortion. Imagine your stance on reproductive rights being so horrific, so vile, that you'd opt instead to make shipping humans off to an island under false pretenses your closing message. Imagine your platform being so morally bankrupt that those are your options. So again, while Republicans will try their hardest to ensure that you lose faith in government, just remember that a politics devoid of empathy, of compassion, of humanity is a choice, and a choice by one party alone. If you want your tax dollars to support that party so they can continue to use human beings as props to advance their theocratic goals, then vote Republican. But if you want a political party that will continue to work for all people, from protecting the most vulnerable among us to building up the middle class, then Democrats are showing you right now that that's exactly what they'll continue to do. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.